Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race. We are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 318 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited that you are here and excited to share with you a guest who has a lot of professional background, a lot of impressive experience and credentials to his name. But today, he is going beyond those. He's talking about something very personal to him, something heartbreaking and tragic. And on that note, I want to add a bit of a trigger warning to this. We do talk about a child passing away and the hurt and the pain that comes along with that. So if this is something very vulnerable, very close to your heart, you may want to listen to this with someone, or just be aware that you may want to, do what's best for your health if you need to. Now, today we are talking to a lecturer of sport and exercise psychology. He's a sports psychology, mental skills coach. He's a consultant that works with various New Zealand athletes in the performance psychology space. I'm excited to welcome Warrick Wood to the episode. Now, Warrick is going to talk about losing his son, Frankie, when he was 3 years old. And I thought this would be a good episode. Actually, Warrick reached out to me, I should say, to share about his story. He had actually written in the Tracksmith Journal recently about loss, about grief, about how we can support those who are going through grief, and how we ourselves can get through grief. So while this episode talks about how running is a major piece in helping, it is actually so much more than running. So I hope this can provide you some comfort, can provide you some support. I personally didn't know a lot of the things Warrick was telling me, so I found it very helpful. And I hope you will consider checking this out and then supporting him through his charity, Frankie to the Rescue. So without any further ado, let's hear from one of our sponsors and go right to the episode with Warrick Wood. Thank you to Allbirds for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I want to talk to you a little bit more today about my current favorite shoes, the Tree Flyers. They have these in both men and women's. They have these in all kinds of beautiful colors, and I've tried 3 or 4 of these colors. I think favorite is the Cream Hush, if you want to go check that out at allbirds.com. But what are the Tree Flyers? Well, they are the performance shoe that Allbirds came out with that have this bio-based Swift foam midsole that is light, bouncy, and ready for distance running. Has a breathable upper to keep the air flowing for extra comfortable miles, and a heel counter, and it's flared with a geometric midsole to help keep your stride steady. Fun fact about that heel counter, they took the waist from the midsole. There was only a few, probably like half the size of your finger, 3 of them pieces of waist, so maybe a little finger and a half worth of waist, and they took that and made that the heel counter. Talk about finding creative ways to be zero or low waist. So you can go faster, you can go further with this Tree Flyer. It's lightweight, it's super springy, it's wildly comfortable. This distance running shoe is going to make those extra effort runs feel effortless. I took this on my 34-mile run, the longest run I'd ever done. They were very comfortable with that. I've taken it on workouts. I've taken it into the Maui Marathon, to the Boston Marathon. It has been a wonderful shoe for me to train in and race in, and of course it is made by Allbirds, so there's a lot of sustainable and genuinely sustainable, not greenwash, sustainable pieces to it. There really is something special about Allbirds in the way that they are doing things, the way that they speak to their carbon number, what that is of the shoe, and by the way, for the Flyers it is 9.92 kilograms of carbon, which you won't get that from other shoes. So go check out allbirds.com to go see more, get yourself a pair of those Flyers and check it out. Warrick, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great. And actually, I'm trying to think about the last person I had on from New Zealand. It was probably I'm trying to think. I think it was someone within the last year, but I know people always love hearing a New Zealand accent. So people are really going to enjoy that. And I'm not going to have the exotic and interesting accent for once. Mine's going to be the boring one. So I'm prepared to give you that title because you have the cool accent. Now, today we're going to go into some things that are going to be a little bit tough. We're also going to talk about some things that I think many runners will resonate with all of the parts of what we're going to talk about today. But we're also going to talk about your running journey and the work that you do. I would imagine many people are very interested in, being that you are a lecturer of sport and exercise psychology. You are primarily in sports psychology, which is an area that I would imagine all of us listening have some interest in. At least I definitely have a fascination with sports psychology. And you've worked with various New Zealand athletes, so we can talk about that element. But before we go in any further, we are going to be talking about grief and loss. And so I just thought, this is something that you, wanted to talk about today and feel it's important to talk about today. Is there anything you would like to remind anyone listening, or just let anyone listening know before we go any further in?
Yeah, it's a good opportunity to provide a little bit of a warning about what we're going to talk about. And everyone's had a pretty disrupted couple of years. And I always want to acknowledge that the last 2 years have been really disrupted for a lot of people. And everyone's had challenges and stresses. And our family have had a really tough time as well. So as you highlighted, we are going to talk about grief today, and unfortunately we lost our 3-year-old son just last year to a rare form of brain cancer. And so it is really helpful, I think, just to provide a little bit of a warning there about what we'll be talking about.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'd imagine that never gets any easier to say and to bring it up. But it also, I did read, you recently wrote a journal article for Tracksmith about grief, and you within that talked a little bit about your experience, but also gave suggestions of how to, I don't want to say, I'm trying to think of what they were exactly. They weren't how to handle it, but how to handle people who are going through grief, I suppose, or how to be there for them. And you gave phrases and things to say, which I personally found very helpful. But you did mention there that for you, bringing up Frankie is something that you like to do and want to do. So before we go in any more, could you maybe share a little bit about that? Because I think that kind of runs counter. Well, a lot of the points you made, I think, run counter to what we might think. But why that in particular? Is it good to talk about Frankie rather than as what people would think, oh, let's just talk about the weather or something that's kind of neutral?
Yeah, and I think you're so accurate there that a lot of the points I made in the Tracksmith piece, and just a quick shout out to Tracksmith for allowing me and giving me that space to write that. Yeah. I'm really grateful to them. But even as I was writing that paper, I was very mindful that many of the pieces of advice I was giving were probably a little bit counterintuitive. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, this is probably quite different to what I would have done if I was the other person. And we've all been that person where you have to engage with someone who has gone through grief or loss or some kind of trauma. And for me and for my wife, Michelle, as well, we both found it really helpful to communicate and share and talk. I mean, losing Frankie was just so devastating. And it was last April that he passed away. And in some ways, it's perhaps a little bit easier, but in other ways, it's more complex and challenging now than it was the day after he passed away, because there's all of these other layers that keep getting piled on top around anxieties about the future, and you fall behind with work goals and become disconnected from friends or colleagues. And one thing that has been really helpful is being able to talk about Frankie, because what we found is that it's always right there beneath the surface. And for many people, there is a concern about making you upset or making you cry. And the reality is that we probably cried within the last hour, and we will again soon. And at least our experience is that we're trying to hold it in a lot of the time. And so when someone provides like a thoughtful question, like, would you like to talk about Frankie, or are there any memories you'd like to share, or tell me a little bit about him, then it almost gives you permission to say his name and talk about him. And we find the only thing worse than, well, one of the things that I guess makes it a little bit worse is not talking about him. And it's actually really difficult to get into anything else before we at least acknowledge, who he was and what he means to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. My cousin, her husband, she lost him suddenly to a brain tumor as well. And I remember her saying that people would cross the street when she was coming, and she was just couldn't, like, to her, that was the absolute worst thing. They'd pretend they didn't see her, but she knew, because it kept happening again and again, that they felt that they didn't want to bring it up or say the wrong thing, so they would avoid her. And I remember just hearing how painful that was for her. And she went to my sister's wedding not long afterwards, and she said that wasn't as bad as being just ignored, or people trying to, just not even acknowledge what had happened. So,
yeah, I bet.
Yeah, that really struck me as surprising that my sister's wedding was okay, but people avoiding talking to her or ignoring her, that was the hardest thing. So thank you for sharing that, because I do think, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that article, because it does, a lot of those points run counter to it. And you've mentioned there about anxieties about the future, things I guess we're going right in.
Yeah.
We'll come back to your running story early on in a bit. But you mentioned there about, anxieties, thoughts on the future. And I would imagine in terms of work, you get kind of a pass for a while where people, he's grieving, or she's grieving, or everyone kind of gives you your space and lets you miss things or forget birthdays and every other thing. But then after a while, everyone expects life to just kind of click back in. And that's not really how it works. And you do have a 6-year-old daughter as well. And I know you've written about that, and maybe you could share a little bit about that, and how, in terms of how hard it can be to parent when you're aware of the whole in your lives that is missing from where Frankie, would have been right now.
Yeah, that's such a hard, challenging part of it. It's that you're carrying this grief and you miss your son so much. And then at the same time, Michelle and I, we both talk about how we feel that we're carrying a lot of grief for her as well, and knowing what she will probably go through at different stages of life. At the moment, she seems to be doing really well, and I find myself a little bit envious of her ability to be present. It seems like sometimes, like, she'll say things like, I miss Frankie, I wish she was here. And then she'll ask what's for dinner, or can we go play with the Lego or something.
Yeah.
And, it's those moments where you, as an adult, we spend so much time dwelling on the past and worried about the future. And so you go to, I miss Frankie too, and I'm going to miss him tomorrow, and he won't be here at Christmas. Whereas she's able to almost switch in or jump in and out of that, which I'm a little bit jealous of. But she seems to be doing okay. But it is a real burden for us as well. It's carrying some of that load for her, and just worried about what it will mean for her as well. We always wanted to have 2 kids, and when you've got one child and you wanting to have another one, it's very different to having 2 and then you go back to having 1. It seems very quiet at home, and there's always someone missing. And even just the visual representation when we look over and we see her playing on her own, or sometimes we'll have friends over for dinner and she might be sitting opposite two sisters or a brother and a sister, and that's always really, really hard to see. And so that's a really big part of the journey for us as well. It's just the constant worry about her. And as you pointed out, the job or that purpose that we have of trying to be a really close, positive family still, and trying to be a good parent to Scarlett when you are constantly exhausted.
Have you, I mean, what have your efforts been around, having conversations with her? I'd imagine it's brought you closer in many ways, but in terms of setting her up for her life to be able to show her feelings, to show vulnerability. I would imagine that this has allowed, I mean, even if just from I can't hold it together all the time in front of her, but it's allowed that vulnerability that often we struggle with, having been raised in a way where vulnerability, I don't know about your family, but most people I talk to, their family struggled with vulnerability growing up, and admitting that things are hard, or like you said, talking about sad things or difficult things. It's always got to pull yourself up and get on with it. But you've been able to show her that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be in pain. And it's okay for things not to be okay. And, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd imagine that's something that will help her for life, even if there are things that are difficult for life as well.
Oh yeah, I agree completely. And yeah, my journeys, it sounds similar to yours, where, I mean, we grow up in these loving families, but we often don't spend a lot of time talking about feelings or emotions, and even developing the vocabulary around things like mental health and how to talk about stresses and anxieties is something we're only, I guess, catching up on now. And so we're definitely trying to create that kind of space for Scarlett where she knows that it's okay to be sad and it's okay to be happy. There are some days where she's playing and seems quite happy, and Michelle and I are really down, and we remind her that that's okay, and we're here to talk to her when she feels sad. So providing that kind of space and making sure that she feels vulnerable and has that psychological safety to share whatever it is that she's feeling in those moments, and knowing that we can hold quite conflicting emotions at the same time as well. Sometimes, we can, we've certainly found that over the last couple of years, there's times where you look at Scarlett and there's so much joy and innocence there, but at the same time, so much sadness, because, whatever it is that we're doing, Frankie would love to be there as well.
Sure. I don't know if have you heard of the author Susan Cain?
Yes.
Have you read her book Bittersweet?
I haven't read the books, but I know the name.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remember reading that you wrote about you being a quiet introvert, and her first book was about introverts, and her second book was about bittersweet, and being able to hold two conflicting emotions in your hand at any point. And not just for you, for anyone. I'm always raving about that book. I really found it eye-opening in many ways, but for you as well, I think it might be quite a good read.
I think that'd be a great read for me. That's something I've certainly struggled with over the last year or so. I've been kind of referring to myself as like a lonely introvert, because I really enjoy and value, or at least typically, I've always valued the times where you wake up before the rest of the family, and you have a quick coffee on your own, or you get home from work, and it might not be hours before anyone, but you've just got a little bit of time to listen to your music or play the guitar or do something on your own. And it's a really important part of my day, and I know it's important to recharge and for my mood and things like that, but honestly, I try to avoid those times now, because it's a scary thought to be home on your own, and it's quiet and where your thoughts go. And I can feel that there's a tension there. It's something that I'm missing out on, which is time that I generally value. So it's something I'm working on.
Yeah. Well, and well done for, acknowledging that is something to work on as well, because that's something that we all struggle with is accepting and acknowledging where we do need to, the lessons that will continue to be put in front of our face. One of which was what you mentioned in the article for me, fixing. That's like my forever thing I'm trying to work on, not trying to fix people's problems. I want to ask you, in your work, as a lecturer, as someone who knows psychology very well, did any part of you struggle early on in terms of, I mean, maybe I'm completely off the mark here, but I would imagine, even from my own love of psychology, I would think, I know this stuff. I should be able to not fix my way out of this, but I should know better. I know the tools and the tactics and the things I should be using that I would be telling other people to be doing. But it's not helping me. It's almost like those, in using a running analogy, we know we should be warming up. We know we should be stretching. We know we should be strength training. We know we should be doing all these things, and yet we don't, or at least I don't. Did you struggle with that early on in terms of, from your work, almost feeling like you should be able to do better?
Yes. Yeah, I did. And it almost makes you question the strategies and tools that you've been suggesting to people, and also highlights the importance of ongoing research and refining of theories. When you think back, I mean, I still consider myself quite young. I'm coming up 37 this year, but even just throughout my time working as an academic and as a mental skills trainer, the change and evolution in theories, when you think back to things like cognitive restructuring and how you might ask an athlete, what are some thoughts that you kind of default to, and how are they unhelpful, and how could you change them to a more positive one? And there might be times where that's quite an easy shift. We can identify things that aren't overly helpful, and we might be able to change them. But then when you think about people who are going through really difficult times, to just be able to identify a thought and be able to change it kind of in the moment, like when a coach or a parent says to an athlete, be confident just before they go out to compete. That's really challenging to do, and highlights the importance of things like compassion and acceptance, and how we can draw from different theories. But I guess going back to your question, it's certainly led to me not necessarily questioning, but it's given me a really good opportunity to put into practice some of the things that I encourage athletes to do. And I've always been very mindful and conscious that I've lived a very kind of fortunate life. I think I even mentioned in that Tracksmith piece that I feel like up until now I've never gone through anything truly challenging before. And so even struggles like trying to slow your thoughts down at night and trying to get to sleep, that is really difficult when you're going through things that are hard, and trying to pay attention to your breath or physical sensations. Those are things that can really help. But this has been a good reminder for me that it is really difficult as well. Yeah. It's not easy, even with understanding of some of these strategies. It's really hard.
Hi friends, just pausing this episode to just let you know a few of the things we have been up to and are up to behind the scenes at Running for Real. Firstly, if you are not already signed up for the weekly newsletter that comes out every Monday, they are very, very popular. They are full of Tina-like rambles. There's also recommendations, things that I think you should check out. You can also keep up to date with what we've been doing with Running for Real that week, and so much more. People really enjoy them, and I think you will too if you like these episodes. Secondly, if you have amenorrhea or Red S, if you are in recovery from amenorrhea or red S, I would love if you would get into contact with our team. If you reach out to sally@runningforreal.com, or you can reach out to me on any of the social media platforms, I would love to hear from you. We are working on something that is going to be life-changing. We are working with the experts, and I'm very excited about it. So if you are someone who is struggling with amenorrhea or red S, please reach out to me and let me know. Finally, I want to let you know about some of the other podcast episodes that you may have missed. We have our weekly Stride episodes on Wednesdays, which are very fun, lighthearted, answering your questions, kind of like an Ask Me Almost Anything type episode. Those are usually 4 to 8 minutes long, so very short, just something you can listen to while you're on a quick drive, while you're washing the dishes, or whatever else you could be doing. And we also have Together Runs. Now, you're hearing us talk a lot about Together Runs lately, and that is because these are something special. You will see as soon as you give them a try, these are special. One last thing, I said finally already, but one last thing. If you are running Chicago Marathon, let me know. If you are running New York Marathon, let me know. And if you happen to be in LA, Venice Beach area around the 16th of September, let me know about that ASAP. Thank you so much to those of you who have continued to connect with us. We love getting to know you. We love hearing from you. Go check out all we are up to at runningforreal.com. I'd imagine a big piece of it is self-compassion is something that's pretty easy to dole out to other people and say, you need to be kind to yourself. You need to treat yourself with respect, especially when it comes to athletes who are generally pretty critical on themselves. But then I would imagine, well, you mentioned there about not having been through something like that before. And I will admit, and it makes me nervous even saying this, but I am in a similar position in that I haven't experienced anything like that. And I'm well aware of that and very grateful for that, but also recognize that it's going to hit me hard at some point. But it's easy to say about self-compassion, but I'd imagine there was a lot of clutching at straws, trying to say, what I should have seen something, things, I could have been aware of something. That self-compassion to give yourself, or even in those early days, maybe, trying to give yourself the free pass to, okay, today, all I want to be able to do is make my bed. And if I've done that, it's a successful day. And that being quite difficult, especially if you are used to working with athletes. You're, I would imagine, a pretty driven person yourself in terms of getting things done. Talk to us a little bit about that element of it.
Yeah, there's a constant kind of tension between, and Michelle, my wife, said the same thing. She was an elite athlete as well. She was a cyclist, and we both got a pretty decent understanding of psychology and sports psychology in particular. And we're working with a psychologist who was allocated to us through the health system here in New Zealand. And we often joke with her about if we are grieving optimally, because it's something that we want to make sure that, we're doing. Is everything that we're doing optimal? Are we ticking kind of all of the boxes, which probably reveals some real perfectionistic kind of type A type of qualities. But it is that balance of trying to figure out what is helpful. And there are days where it feels like you can wake up and I might have a 9 a.m. lecture, and kind of knowing that is there is really helpful. But then there'll be other days where it's not, it doesn't dissolve any of the stress or anxiety the way it did the day before. So it's hard to find a pattern, but for me at least, it does come back to that self-compassion and trying to stay present as much as possible too. I often find that I wake up, and if I have a meeting or a lecture later in the day, or I might be running a session with a team, that can be quite daunting and confronting. And you think, or I might question, can I actually do that? And it's that discipline to think, well, that's later. I can't control that now. Like you said, make your bed, make a nice cup of coffee. You can control that, and then you can cancel later. and giving yourself permission to do that can sometimes just lessen that tension or anxiety a little bit. And then what I find is 95% of the time you go through and it's challenging, but it's fine. At least I show up and I try my best.
Yeah, and that's all we can do, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about running and how that has been there for you. Maybe let's start back with what was your relationship with running, throughout your time as a runner, up until the last few years before we go into that.
Yeah, it's funny. When I think back to like my teenage years, for instance, I ran essentially as training for team sports. I played a bunch of team sports growing up, and I saw running as just a training outlet, mechanism to help me in sport. And if someone told me I was going to become, a quote unquote runner, I wouldn't have believed them at all. But over the years, it became something that was a real joyous kind of activity. I just became really intrinsically attracted to it for some reason, and probably partly the introvert in me. I liked the quiet time. I liked being alone with my thoughts. I've never been a competitive runner. I guess I consider myself like a competitive recreational runner. I ran my first sub-3 marathon recently, which was just really cool.
Hold up. That is competitive.
Well,
that's definitely in the field of like competitive.
I don't know about that.
No, I'm not letting you pass that. Most of my listeners would have just been like, oh, because they're like, wait a minute, 4 hours is fast, 5 hours is fast. So you are not sliding under that. That's a competitive runner there. So
all right, well, I'll make sure I go tell my friends that Tina Muir said I'm a competitive runner.
yes. Yeah, no, anything under 3 is tough. I shouldn't say that. Anything completing a marathon, running in general is tough, but running sub-3 is you're up there. So sorry, continue.
Well, let's just say it was 2:59.
Okay. Still under 3.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for that. But running was always something that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the activity itself. It wasn't really about anything other than what I experienced whilst doing it, which I think was really helpful for me. It wasn't about competing with other people. It was really just something that I enjoyed how it made me feel during. And I guess it helped, I'm very mindful now that it helps me with my mood, helps me sleep better and all of those things, particularly over the last couple of years. But getting into it, it was just very much an intrinsic attraction to it. I really enjoyed the challenge of getting faster, and I love the psychological journey during a race, just the self-talk and kind of where it goes and how quickly it can go from a place of confidence and trust and belief to, you can stop. Like there's no one forcing you to continue running.
Yeah. I remember a few years ago, I was listening to a audiobook and on my run, and I remember I had to put it on like 2x or 1.5x, I think, because it feels sometimes in running like even your brain is moving on fast forward, and this audiobook felt like them talking at normal speed was too slow. Like I was almost like having time to have a thought between each sentence they were saying, because I felt like my brain was running faster. So yeah, you're absolutely right. One minute you can be like, this is amazing, I feel so good. And then 1 minute later, you're like, uh-oh, I'm done. This is it. It's over.
Yeah. You just detonate and it's so hard to come back from that. But of course, like we've all experienced when you can stick with it for a little bit and then all of a sudden, you come right.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
No, it's an interesting sport in that sense of things, and I want to later come back to some of the strange things you've noticed runners doing compared to other athletes. But let's talk about the last 2 years in terms of running. What has running provided you with in that way? Yeah,
I'm a bit of a running tragic now, and I feel like I could probably list off the things that it hasn't done for me quicker than the things it has. I feel so grateful to be able to run. And actually over the last week and a half, I've had like a nasty head cold, and it's just reminded me how important it is. You do take it for granted sometimes, and I'm going over to run Sydney Marathon in about a month, and so there's that kind of training concern as well. But even just like I mentioned a few minutes ago around sleep and mood, and it affects everything. But I guess for me, it is that opportunity to be present, and of course your mind. We all find our mind wanders, and I used to love running without music, without podcasts, and I find now probably half the time I'll be listening to music or a podcast just if I'm feeling, sad and I'm missing Frankie, and I just think I probably need some distraction today as opposed to kind of the quietness and worrying about where my thoughts will go. But like anyone, I probably spend too much time dwelling on things or worrying about the future. So running definitely gives me that outlet. It's almost like an informal mindfulness exercise where you can focus on your breathing and your cadence and how you're feeling. And so that's certainly really, really helpful, just as a kind of like a forcing function to be present. And I mean, I'm not much of a religious or spiritual person, but I feel really connected to the environment when I'm running as well. We live in a little community just outside of Auckland, and we live right next to a huge forest, and that forest has become really important to us. When Frankie was here, we used to go in there a few times a week, and during all the lockdowns with COVID, we went in there even more often, and we ended up having his 3rd birthday party and a little memorial for him in there. So it's always pretty heavy going in there, but it's another place where you feel that connection with him. And I'm also part of a running club here in Auckland who have been amazing with support and allowing me to talk about Frankie and feel a real sense of belonging. It's the first running club I've ever been in, and I've really enjoyed that. Like running as part of a club has been really cool. So that connection with other people, other like-minded runners, that often give me a space to talk about what I'm going through. And sometimes also it's meeting new people that don't know what I'm going through. And I find that can be quite helpful too, because they almost talk to you in a different way.
I'd imagine that you have also managed to find a connection with, people in general, with the vulnerability that you show, but especially in your running group, as you mentioned, when we do tend to, because we're not looking at each other and don't have the eye contact thing, we're running side by side. Like, I've heard the thing of like, you're telling your secrets to the wind. Well, that's what it feels like, because you're, just going forward together. But I would imagine you have also allowed people to maybe share some of their things that they're working through, because you are able to talk about something that is really difficult. It allows them to feel that they're in a safe space to be able to open up to you as well. And that probably has been a gift to many of them as well, in addition to you having people to share stories with.
I hope so. I'd like to think that would be the case, and I definitely find that is a really profound gift that we can give someone, is that space to actually talk about what it is that they're going through. And everyone has their own unique preferences. Some people won't like to talk and some will. And for me, it's about giving people the space or the opportunity to do so if they wish. And sometimes talking to someone that they don't know as well can actually be a little bit more comfortable, as opposed to talking to a really close friend or talking to a sibling. And I find that I talk to some running friends about things that I may not talk to parents or siblings about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I think it won't come as a surprise to the listeners that is me. And sometimes I do offend those closest to me when they're like, you told the whole world that you were struggling with this and I didn't even know this. I'm like, I'm sorry. Sometimes it just comes out that way. I just get on my phone. I'm like, and then it's out in the world. So I definitely agree with that. Let's talk about in many ways, it almost feels like running you've mentioned the kind of ups and downs we go through as we're completing these challenging things, that we would be prepared and ready to handle something tough emotionally, because we've pushed ourselves physically, but not only physically, we've pushed ourselves mentally and sometimes emotionally. But did you feel like running helped you to handle grief, or do you feel like it was just almost like blindsided you because you thought you would be able to work through it easier?
That's a really good question, and to be honest, I don't know. I feel like we can come back on part 2 of the podcast in a year or something, and maybe I'll let you know. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in some ways it probably does, and maybe just from a sense of trust that you can get through difficult things, and the importance of it's such a different context, but like the importance of being present and staying connected to your purpose. For instance, like, why are you actually running this race? And I know I do that a lot now. I might be having a tough day, and then you kind of come back to, it's important for me to be a really good husband and partner, and it's about being a really good dad to Scarlett. I don't need to be perfect, but if I can be present, that's a really good step. And so perhaps some of those lessons that we get from running have been transferred into what I'm experiencing now, just in a broader sense. Yeah, no, I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine that's the case. But yeah, in some scenarios, it's something that, again, like the psychology piece earlier, like you feel like it should have helped you, but maybe it's just so totally different. Tell us a little bit about Frankie to the rescue and why you decided to make that something that you wanted to add another thing to your plate while you were already had all these other things you were doing. Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk about that. So we started Frankie to the Rescue to support families who have children with a terminal diagnosis who are receiving palliative care. Frankie just loved anything rescue related, loved Fireman Sam, Paw Patrol. Yeah, I was going to say Paw Patrol, definitely. yeah, Marshall from Paw Patrol. And he was just such a kind, cheeky, sweet little boy, but really loved watching like rescue shows. And it's so hard now to think about all of the things that he may have gone on to do that he won't get to do now. So I guess part of this work, it's thinking about Frankie still doing some good, almost like everything we're doing. It's just him doing it. We wouldn't be doing it without him. So our journey was quite unique. What we found, we received the news that he had a aggressive form of cancer in December of 2020, and he passed away 5 months later. And I think sometimes when we tell people about that, they picture us having like a sick kid, and he passed away when he was 3.5, and for 2 years, 11 months, as far as we knew, he was perfectly healthy. And I mean, from what the doctors say, he was. Something like this comes on so quick, and it was just so shocking, and it all happened so quickly that we had a very unique experience. So we were only working with palliative care for 2 or 3 weeks before he passed away, where it's spread in his brain and then down his spinal cord. But we had this really kind of comforting, amazing support from palliative care here in New Zealand. And what we found is that throughout that time, there was nothing that helps. You're just in survival mode, and you're trying to do kind of right by your person, by Frankie, and look after him. But the kindness that people showed us does provide just a little bit of comfort. And so that's what we wanted to do. And we were also very lucky that we didn't have financial stress. It was just the trauma and the stress and anxiety of Frankie being sick. So Frankie to the Rescue, we're on Instagram and Facebook, and we are providing through the generous donations from people. And we have a Give a Little page as well, but we are providing parking vouchers, meal vouchers, and gifts and toys to the children themselves and to families who are supporting someone with a terminal diagnosis. So hopefully just providing a little bit of comfort to people who are going through just the most challenging of times.
Can anyone donate to that for listeners who are in countries outside of New Zealand? Is that how
Yes.
does that work? Can they donate worldwide? Okay.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, we've received some very generous donations from people all over the world. So it's there's a link to the Give a Little page on our Facebook and Instagram pages, or you can, if you just Google Frankie to the rescue, you'll find it. Frankie
to the rescue on Google will come up as well. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned there about it was just a few weeks of the palliative, that's how you say it, right? Palliative care?
Yeah.
Yeah. The time between that and the diagnosis, you mentioned, I actually can't remember where I saw this, but that it was kind of a special time where, obviously you were sad and you were aware of what was coming, but it was a time, you said earlier that Frankie was very, in good spirits, being present, making the most of every day, finding joy in tough moments. Just tell us a little bit about that and if you'll share with us.
Yeah, it's so hard to even explain and to articulate. It's such a hazy fog almost. Like even if I think about now, how would someone get through that? It's just hard to comprehend. We were very, early on when Frankie got a couple of scans, the first week we were in hospital, we had, often when we received news, we'd get a whole team of doctors coming in, which I don't have much experience in the hospital, but I feel like any time doctors come in and set up chairs in a semicircle, and people are taking notes, and we were very lucky to have a very good surgeon, and he came in with tears in his eyes. It's really, really tough. But we knew very early that it wasn't good. It wasn't a good diagnosis. And how we got through that time is I'll never know. Like I said, you're just kind of on survival mode almost. And it's a strange time and tension because you're so mindful that there's this ticking clock essentially.
Yeah.
You've got this finite amount of time where you feel there's this natural order. There's a contract where we'll get old and then we'll pass away and our kids kind of stick around and everything's just completely disorientated, and you know that that's occurring, but you also want to enjoy all of these times because there are so few left. And so for us it was about trying to be as present and as kind of connected as a family as we could. And there were times that you would do that quite well, but I think most of the time is such a struggle because you're trying to create these moments and do these fun things. We went on some cool trips together as a family, but it's really difficult. I was explaining it to a colleague recently, and I don't know if I stole this analogy from someone or not, but I kind of think of it as when we got the diagnosis, it's almost like you put on some dark sunglasses and then you just don't take them off again. And I'm hoping at some time they maybe just change how dark how darkly tinted they are. But it's quite a helpful way to think about it, and with regards to just everything changes. Even now, you come into work, and I've always loved my job. I'm very fortunate to have a job that I love coming to, but it's different, and your home is different. You come home each day, and Frankie's room's tidy. It's always tidy now, and it should be messy. And so all of those things are really tough, but we did create some really cool memories, and Frankie was fortunate in the way that a lot of the symptoms that we understood he may develop, he never did. So he lost a lot of his, gross motor control. He lost his balance and his ability to walk. But we were gifted little Marshall from Paw Patrol like fire truck that had a battery in it, which all the kids in the neighborhood would just like double take as Frankie cruised past them. But even like right towards the end, his symptoms allowed him to, he'd kind of lean a little bit and he'd steer with one hand because he couldn't hold the steering wheel with his other hand. So he looked really cool. And and he was able to use one leg for the accelerator, and he was able to steer with one hand. And he never lost his vision or his hearing. Like, he always knew where he was and who we were. And we were really grateful that he passed away really peacefully at home, and it wasn't in a hospital with doctors around. We got to the point where medicine couldn't do anything other than keeping him comfortable, and we were very fortunate with the palliative care, and we had community nurses, and we were able to keep him really comfortable at home until he passed away peacefully.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Once again, so sorry for your loss. It's just so tough, and I know you are helping so many people listening to this who either are, maybe further along on the grief spectrum but still feel it on a deep level, or for people who it's very raw right now. So I know it's difficult, but we really appreciate you sharing with us. Is there anything else you would like to tell anyone who is in that, in the thick of it, just feeling that grief right now?
I guess my pieces of advice for people that are like in the middle of it would be to just keep talking, find people to talk to and find things to do that help. And it's not easy to do, but to find acceptance that it won't go away, but find things to do that will help you in those moments where it does feel overwhelming and unbearable, when those kind of waves of grief come that you feel like won't kind of pass, and to have things in place that you can do to help kind of ride those waves, whether it is going for a run or whether it is music or calling someone to talk to them on the phone, and having those things that you trust will work. And that's been really helpful for me. So in those moments where it does become a little bit overwhelming, you're not kind of searching for things. Very similar to what I talk to athletes about. If you do the work and you have strategies in place, so when you get to that, second set in tennis and things aren't going well, and it's like, well, I think Warrick told me to be positive, kind of, and then you've got to come up with what that means, as opposed to having some things in place that work for you. And I found that to be quite helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really valid point, and I'd imagine there's quite a few things that you have told. Do you call them clients, or you just call them athletes, I suppose? Over the years that you have, tried to pull in yourself and use within your own healing and the tough things that you're working through. I'd love to just go into, just for the last few minutes, a little bit about your work. So you mentioned lecturer of sports psychology and a consultant that you work with various athletes in New Zealand. What are some of the things that you think or you've noticed? Do you work with any runners, or is it? I
actually haven't worked with many runners. I've worked with some, but it is actually one of the groups of people that I've worked with less.
Okay, so then you can only compare to yourself. But what are some of the things you have noticed with run? Well, I guess you can't really say with runners. I guess you could say what you've noticed about other sports versus some of the things that you tend to find you and people you run with experience.
So what are the differences?
Yeah, what are some of the, I guess, things that runners often struggle with that you have noticed with the runners you're around that other sports don't typically deal with?
Yeah, because because I haven't worked too much with competitive runners, it's hard for me to suggest. I've worked with cyclists who might have similar kind of mindsets or tendencies,
I could see that.
I guess. Yeah. And I know one of the things that I have seen is that like injuries and niggles are really difficult to accept, and recovery is really hard. You know, that acceptance of like, I've got this injury or this niggle and I'm going to have some time off or some days without training. That's probably something that many struggle with. But I wouldn't say that is unique to just runners. It's probably me.
I definitely don't think that's just you. That's from my experience, at least, that's definitely something I've worked through, and many people I know who I've come to know in the running world do too. Okay, I guess to wrap up here, what do you see as the role running will continue to play for you? You got to write for Tracksmith. You got to share that experience in a place where other people will see it and appreciate it. But for you, do you see something running as something that will continue to help you through various parts of whatever ups and downs life may bring to you? Is there some part of you that would like to try something else? Like, where does running stand for you as you move forward?
Yeah, running is such an important part of my life now. And almost in a similar way to people have asked me recently about getting back into work and asked me about, like, is work a nice distraction from grief or from missing Frankie? And I think it's quite similar with running, where it's not so much a distraction, but it provides me with an outlet, something to feel, it's kind of cathartic in and of itself. But also, we've all got that psychological need to feel a sense of growth and competence and development. So that's been really helpful for me. And I think it will be going forward as well, just continuing to try to, run smarter and run faster and become healthier, essentially become a better runner. And so having that as not so much a distraction, but having it as a really positive focus in my life is something I deeply value.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I think we can all strive towards. It's not always easy to attain. But you mentioned that you were, you've never been particularly competitive with other people, just to be able to do your best, which is well on the way to where you want to be, and that's such a good attitude to have towards it. So, you said Sydney Marathon next month.
Sydney Marathon, yeah, it'll be an interesting one because I'm running with my brother and brother-in-law and father, and this will be our third year attempting it with, we're not attempting it, but we were going to run it essentially a few years ago before COVID hit and then before Frankie got sick. So it will be an interesting experience to finally get over there, and I'm sure it'll be quite emotional to run it, but hopefully have a good time.
Do you plan to run together, or?
I don't think we'll run together. My brother and I are very similar times. We're not too competitive with each other, but I think that will be quite fun to go out, perhaps starting together and then see if we can pace each other to a sub-3 time over there would be really fun.
Cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck. And we mentioned Frankie to the Rescue. We'll put that in the show notes, Instagram, Facebook, and the link for the page. Is there anywhere else you would like to send people to go either follow along with you or just keep up to date with what you're up to?
I mean, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well, just at Warrick Wood. To be honest, I'm not overly active, and it would mean the world to get more followers on Frankie to the Rescue and follow along with that. Obviously, the more followers we get, the easier it is to get businesses and organizations on board, which we've already got some really kind people on board supporting us with different things. So that would mean the world to get some more followers on Frankie to the Rescue.
Okay. All right. We'll send people there. Thank you so much for your courage to share with us your vulnerability, the clear love and joy that Frankie brought to you and will continue to bring to you in memories and through what you're able to do in his name. I really appreciate you sharing, and Yeah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
The Running for Real podcast and everything we do here at Running for Real would not be possible if it wasn't for the Running for Real team. While I am the person who you hear from most often and maybe the face of the brand, the rest of our team are such critical pieces of what we do, and without them, I think I'd just be running around in circles with ideas. So I want to take a moment to thank our team. To Jeremy Nessel, who's been with me since the very beginning, Kat McKay, Sally Pontarelli, Kelsey Wang, Sandy Gutierrez, Louise Murphy, Andrew Basola, Alexandria Will, and Maria Vargas. Thank you to each and every one of you for all that you give to Running for Real and our community. I appreciate you, and I'm so thankful for having you as a part of the team. So appreciative of Warrick for speaking out about that, for sharing in such a vulnerable and courageous way about what he's going through, giving us advice, helping others who are going through a similar thing. Just so much bravery there. And I really appreciate and admire all that he has been doing there. You can find links to Frankie to the rescue in the show notes by going to runningforreal.com/episode 318. And you can also get links to our sponsors in there. Go check out those Allbirds tree flyers. And you can also get links to the Together Runs and weekly strides. So be sure to go check those out if you have not already. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This is such an important conversation to have, and I'm glad and proud to be having this on our platform. I'll see you on Monday for a Together Run and Wednesday for a weekly stride. And I'll see you next Friday for a regular episode. See you then.